Chuck, this isn't gonna get us anywhere, you know. We're both lousy shots.
A high-tech theme park's new updates will hopefully make people forget about that trivial business of dozens of attendees and staff being massacred by crazed animatronic killers.
Wait a minute, this is supposed to be a vacation!
However, and there is a however, something else is going on in Futureworld.
In Futureworld, nothing can go wrong.
Futureworld is a 1976 sequel to the 1973 sort of hit Westworld, a modestly budgeted sci-fi thriller that was written and directed by Michael Crichton. In Westworld, you could wander around a western town staffed by realistic robots, who you could play cards with, you could fight with, and yes, totally take to your room and offer apologies to, adding that it's never happened to you before. And then the robots would suddenly snap and kill all but one of the guests and the human staff. It was a small success, but enough of one that a sequel was made in 1976, just without Michael Crichton's involvement, who wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. He may have been right.
Oh, wonderful.
Futureworld was, by and large, a mostly unloved film on release. Looking at it now, parts of it are okay, with some interesting ideas that allow the film to largely get away without being too much of a retread of the original film.
I'm not sure I'm ready for this.
Futureworld is set 2 years after the incident at Westworld, and its parent company, Delos, are owning the problem by explaining to journalists what went wrong. I mean, they have quite a PR problem. They have a resort that charges well-heeled guests $1,200 a day, and they have to convince people to come back, and in numbers, because now they won't be killed by Meccano set murderers. I mean, a free tote bag, a complimentary Happy Meal, and a 20% off coupon for your next funeral only goes so far in restoring consumer confidence. Two of the journalists at this presentation are television star Tracy Ballard and newspaperman Chuck Browning, who had previously written a devastating expose on the Westworld disaster.
Our problem is the memory of the disaster at Westworld.
They are invited by the company's head man, Duffy, to visit the Delos Resort's latest attractions, particularly Futureworld, as part of a research junket.
There's really nothing to worry about.
The company is making noises about transparency as part of its PR moves and hopes the pair will write a fair and favourable appraisal of the park. This all presupposes that there is not at all any dark underbelly to Delos and that the resort is not a cover for some deep, dark secret and a conspiracy. I'm not so sure. Chuck also isn't so sure, as he'd been called by somebody called Frenchie with information on Delos. But when Chuck meets up with the man who disappointingly is not speaking with a Parisian accent, it turns out he's been mortally wounded.
You know, you are looking for something that isn't there.
You may be right.
The Delos Resort has several different worlds that you can visit, but for some reason none of them rhyme with Schmestworld, so the film keeps it tight and sticks to Futureworld. Once at Futureworld, Chuck and Tracy get in a realistic simulation of a rocket launch, while wearing a realistic simulation of a bedspread. They indulge in some of the games that Delos has put together, a 3D chess game, and a boxing game. It's all very impressive for 1976. All the while interspersed with a contest winner who seems to serve no other purpose in the film other than to talk about how he can sex up the robots.
Once you make it with a robot chick, that's it. You don't never want nothing else.
Like, can he sleep with this robot?
Oh no, sir, I'm a 500. I'm not programmed for sex.
There are just so many different model robots from the simple 400 series and above. These robots apparently don't do well with water and humidity, which means for this guy, finding a waterproof model is imperative. A big part of the Delos experience is for guests to be able to sleep with the sex models at the resort.
We're both sex models.
The worst part of the Delos experience being the poor schlub of a technician who has to operate the wet and dry vacuum cleaner.
Are you gonna do it?
Do what, Ron?
Have sex with a robot!
It turns out while Duffy is playing gracious host, his technical director Dr. Schneider isn't as warm. When Tracy tries to chat up a technician, she gets nowhere since most of the staff are now robots. Apparently, in a business where robots went rogue and killed everyone, robots are more trustworthy. Sure, they might go wrong and kill you, but at least with a robot you could leave a poker game for a minute in order to visit the bathroom and be fairly sure that they won't take a look at your cards while you're gone.
Mr. Browning is getting much too curious.
And then after everyone's asleep, Delos's actual plan kicks into action. Tracy, Chuck and a few dignitaries of the resort are taken to various facilities as everybody is being scanned for some reason.
You're a liar.
No, sir. I'm not programmed to lie.
Well, for a man without a program, you do a pretty damn good job.
Up until now, the film had been relatively innocuous fun. But now the vibe is turning darker.
No, this is about as exciting as a visit to the waterworks.
Now lighten up, Sox. Determination is a mark of a good reporter.
They trigger, 3 automated samurai clones created out of thin air. They're either samurai or 3 stuntmen whose choice of Halloween costumes will see them disowned by their families. They are rescued by Harry, a long-time worker at Delos who keeps things running. By, yes, using his wet and dry vacuum.
You've seen a lot, Clark has.
It's a wonder he can still move at all.
Thank you, Clark.
Dr. Schneider turns up to collect them. He sneers at the heroes. He's obviously a villain. He's so villainous, boo hiss. The evil of Dr. Schneider is telegraphed so much that you could use it to send a message from New York to San Diego. Tracy's given a chance to enter a machine that records your dreams, which then for some reason ends up in her having a weird fantasy that melds her previous dream of being attacked by surgeons with the image of the gunfighter who killed the guests in the first film. I mean, she likes a bad boy. The dream turns, depending on your outlook, either incredibly erotic or insanely comical, or some combination of the two, eromical. Chuck, Tracy and Harry learn the truth. Schneider and Delos have built perfect duplicates of the dignitaries and of Tracy and Chuck. The idea is that duplicates will be stooges for the company in public. Using robots or automatons to try and get around rules and regulations isn't all that unusual. Look, I once bought 3 X-Store mannequins off eBay just so I could use the carpool lane. But I soon found that I enjoyed their company so much that we all went to Disneyland for a week. It was fun for a while, but it didn't end well once they started hooking up with the animatronic cast of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride.
Well, anyway, don't you think it's dangerous to rely too much on the robots? Don't you think something could go wrong again?
Also, admit it, you thought the robots were going to go rogue. Chuck, Tracy and Harry make plans to get the hell out of Delos, but that plan falls apart when Harry is killed by Robot Chuck. Chuck is confronted by Duffy, who, it turns out, is the leader of the plot. And of course, guess what? Duffy is also a robot. You know who's also a robot? This guy. You know who else is also a robot? This gal.
What are you?
You.
The robots are perfect clones of their hosts, made from synthetic flesh and blood with the same memories and thought patterns as their templates.
They've all been replaced by those things.
There is one upside to going to lunch with your robotic clone. Arguments about where to eat are at least fairly short. Tracy confronts her robot doppelganger in a showdown in Westworld, though Tracy was a crack shot and manages to outshoot her robot BFF, which in this case now stands for Bot Fiend Fall Over. Chuck, on the other hand, is a lousy shot, and his robot knows it because he's also a perfect copy, who's also a lousy shot. So one Chuck chases the other Chuck throughout the complex, leading to a fight, and one of them falls to their doom. But which one fell? Which also begs the question, how much Chuck could a clone Chuck Chuck if a clone Chuck could Chuck Chuck?
Took me a week to get over that.
Chuck and Tracy meet up, and then they convince Dr. Schneider that they are in fact the 2 auto-tuned versions of Chuck and Tracy.
Hey, you know, I still don't think that kissing me was a very scientific way of finding out who was who.
Futureworld is a weird one. Well, it's not well loved, but if you saw it when you were young and impressionable, which is a nice way of saying you thought pro wrestling was real, it was a cool film.
I don't know if I've got a real story here or not.
Sort of decent enough for the time it was made. It's a film with relatively few optical effects, almost everything is done in camera. Yet it actually has quite a remarkable scale for a fairly cheap film. Much of the film was shot on location in Houston in Texas, so those rockets were real rockets shot at the Johnson Space Center. The bit that the kids remembered back in the day, the early look at 3D games, such as chess, where here it's literally just some actors on a set. And of course the Rock'em Sock'em robot boxing game. I mean, it's effective, but it also looks a little bit cheap for the reason that it was a little bit cheap. Michael Crichton didn't want to be involved, but the original studio MGM got that film's producer Paul Lazarus to put together a sequel. But then the studio wasn't keen on the script and tried to flog off the film to some other sucker. They put the film in turnaround with the hopes of finding a buyer more in tune with the material that would give the project the care and attention it deserved, which I suppose is pretty much what happened.
Activate the pain-pleasure gradient, please.
Futureworld was directed by Richard T Heffron, who directed a few other features but mainly worked in television movies and episodic drama. He'd again dabble in science fiction by helming V the Final Battle, where he switched from androids confusing conspiracy theorists to space lizards confusing conspiracy theorists. I mean, confusing a conspiracy theorist does seem like low-hanging fruit. Also, Low-hanging fruit is poisoned due to its proximity to fertilizers on the ground, and what they don't want you to know is fertilizers are mainly bullshit.
Are you sure?
No!
Futureworld did have a few behind-the-scenes personnel return from the first movie, including composer Fred Karlin, whose score for Futureworld is pretty decent. Futureworld does in some ways feel like a parts bin special. What can we film on location so we don't have to build expensive sets or props? What stock footage of surgery or early examples of computer graphics can we stick on a screen? What sets can we redress from Logan's Run? That sort of thing. One thing that is most impressive in hindsight: a computer-generated mask of Peter Fonda, which marks one of the earliest, if not the earliest times, actual 3D computer graphics had appeared in a feature film. I'll give them kudos for making this film have a sense of scope greater than that of the original movie. Futureworld is not a particularly visually pretty film, with its often muted colours and lighting, but it is fine for what it is.
Can I give you a hand?
The cast, well, it's Bridget Fonda's father and Gwyneth Paltrow's mum. Peter Fonda was the son of actor Henry Fonda, and the younger Fonda went all in on late 60s counterculture when he made Easy Rider with Dennis Hopper. A few years later, he's doing Futureworld.
Futureworld, huh?
Where at times he comes across as a little stiff, just thankfully not in this scene.
Do you know what he was talking about?
Blythe Danner had by this stage already appeared in a few films and a fair bit of television. Stuart Margolin was a familiar sight in 70s television, where he'd often appear in The Rockford Files and MASH. Arthur Hill had been a lead in another 70s classic, The Andromeda Strain, though here his usually benevolent image, like Chuck in this scene, took quite a battering. And Yul Brynner, there's absolutely no reason for him to be in this film, other than, hey, why not? He showed up for a few days to appear in Tracy's sex dream, mainly because there wasn't all that much of a superficial visual link to the original film without him. The storyline is okay, the acting quite decent, the action and staging work fine. It's just perhaps a film that is a little better than its reputation suggests, but it's also optional viewing. It's perhaps notable for the fact that the makers of the later HBO series seem to be the only people who took anything from this film.
They are living beings, produced by the genetic information in your own cells. There are no mechanical parts.
Hey, the super advanced duplicates here are also meant to be synthetic flesh and blood compared to the original's jumped up Lego Technic sex toys. Now, having written that sentence, and now having said it out aloud, all I can say is, ow. Futureworld did not review well in the US, though they liked it enough in Europe. The film's box office was relatively mediocre, leading to it being quietly forgotten by many. The Westworld franchise would bubble again to the surface a few years later with a very, very, very short-lived television series, Beyond Westworld, which comprehensively ignored the existence of Futureworld.
Westworld is destroyed.
Which, truth be told, isn't all that hard. Again, it's a film with a poor reputation, mainly because the premise is nowhere near as much fun as the original film. A film where rock'em, sock'em, fuck'em robots went crazy. But I found Futureworld just entertaining enough to not have an overwhelmingly negative view of the film. It's not a great film, but it's palatable. Mainly because, while it is a follow-up to Westworld, it mostly tries to not be a total retread of the first movie. It also does a decent job of hiding its relatively meager budget. In the end though, the one thing the film is really lacking is charm. The film just lacks its own personality. Take away Westworld links and it could be any mid-70s paranoid thriller. Speaking of mid-70s and paranoid, old Jed on Snapchat.
We're losing it. She's waking up.
Futureworld is a decent mid-70s sci-fi thriller. It's just not an essential entry into the genre of robot faces falling off dramatically. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below or check out some of our other videos.